My name is Claire Bennett, and for most of my life, I believed family meant sacrifice. I was 38 years old, living in Columbus, Ohio, and working as a senior accountant. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. Every paycheck I earned came from years of hard work. My younger brother, Ethan, was the opposite. Ethan jumped from one business idea to another. One year he wanted to open a restaurant. The next year he wanted to sell luxury watches online. Every plan failed. Every debt somehow became my parents' problem. And eventually, my problem. It started 15 years earlier when my father lost his manufacturing job. I stepped in immediately. I paid their mortgage for 6 months. Then 6 months became a year. Then a year became 5. After a while nobody even thanked me anymore. The money was simply expected. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering, Ethan was treated like a hero. He's trying so hard. He's ambitious. He just needs one lucky break. Meanwhile, I quietly paid bills nobody talked about. Electric bills. Property taxes. Medical expenses. Insurance. Repairs. I never complained. Because they were my family. Then one rainy Tuesday morning my phone rang. It was my mother. She sounded panicked. "Claire, your father collapsed." My stomach dropped. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the hospital. When I arrived, Ethan was already there. Standing dramatically in the hallway. Talking loudly to nurses. Acting like he had been carrying the family on his shoulders. The reality? He hadn't contributed $1 in years. Dad survived the heart attack. But during recovery, doctors discovered something worse. Advanced heart disease. The surgery would be expensive. Very expensive. My parents looked at me. Not Ethan. Me. The same way they always did. Like I was the solution. And against my better judgment, I said yes. Again. I paid for everything. The surgery. The rehabilitation. The medications. The follow-up treatments. Nearly $80,000. Over the next 2 years, my savings account shrank dramatically. But Dad recovered. And everyone celebrated. Especially Ethan. At Dad's 65th birthday party, my mother raised her glass. None of this would have been possible without Ethan supporting us emotionally. The room applauded. I sat there speechless. Ethan smiled proudly. Not one person mentioned the woman who paid every bill. Not one. That was the night something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like glass developing a tiny fracture. The kind that eventually shatters. And I had no idea that the biggest betrayal was still coming. 3 years later, my father passed away peacefully in his sleep. Despite everything, I loved him. I took 2 weeks off work to help arrange the funeral. I handled the paperwork. The cemetery. The flowers. The guests. The bills. As usual. Ethan handled none of it. Yet during the funeral, everyone kept telling him how strong he was. I was too exhausted to care. A week later, the family gathered at a lawyer's office for the reading of Dad's will. I wasn't expecting anything. Honestly, I assumed everything would be divided equally. I was wrong. Very wrong. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading. At first everything sounded normal. Then came the part that changed everything. Dad's house. The lake cabin. His investment account. His classic car collection. Everything. Every single major asset. Was being left to Ethan. I froze. Surely there had to be a mistake. Then the lawyer continued. My inheritance? A small envelope. Nothing else. The room felt silent. My mother smiled. Actually smiled. As if this outcome was perfectly reasonable. Ethan looked shocked for about 3 seconds. Then his expression turned into satisfaction. The lawyer handed me the envelope. Inside was a short note. Just one sentence. Thank you for always helping the family. That was it. No explanation. No apology. No recognition. Just a thank you note. After 15 years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Countless sacrifices. That tiny piece of paper was all I received. I stood up. Nobody stopped me. Nobody seemed concerned. As I reached the door, I heard Ethan speaking. He wasn't whispering. Honestly, Claire doesn't need the money anyway. A few people laughed. I walked out before anyone could see the tears. That night I sat alone in my apartment. The note was still lying on my kitchen table. I kept staring at it. Reading the same sentence over and over. Thank you for always helping the family. Finally something became clear. I wasn't family. I was an emergency fund. A walking ATM. A backup plan. And the moment I realized that, everything changed. The next morning my phone rang. It was my mother. I already knew what she wanted. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. For the first time in my life, I said no. And neither she nor Ethan had any idea what that single word was about to cost them. The morning after the will reading, my phone rang at exactly 8:12 a.m. Mom. I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Instead, I answered. Hello? Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Which immediately made me suspicious. Claire, sweetheart, how are you holding up? I almost laughed. 24 hours earlier she had watched me get excluded from Dad's estate without saying a word. Now she was worried about my feelings? Fine. There was a brief silence. Then she got to the real reason she called. Actually, Ethan needs a little help. Of course he did. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of help? Well, the property taxes on the lake cabin are due. I closed my eyes. Unbelievable. Dad hadn't even been buried for 2 weeks. And already they wanted money. Again. Mom. Continued. Since you're so good with finances. There it was. The familiar script. The same one I'd heard my entire adult life. Claire solves the problem. Claire pays the bill. Claire saves everyone. Not this time. I took a deep breath. No. Silence. Complete silence. What? No. Mom sounded confused. As if she didn't understand the word. Claire, it's family. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. Really? She didn't answer. For 15 years I paid bills. Still silence. I paid for Dad's surgery. Nothing. I paid your taxes. Nothing. I paid your insurance. Nothing. Then I asked the question I'd never asked before. What exactly has Ethan paid for? The silence became uncomfortable. Because she didn't have an answer. Finally she said. That's different. I smiled. No. It's not. And then I hung up. For the first time in my life. I hung up. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From freedom. The next few weeks were surprisingly peaceful. No emergency calls. No surprise expenses. No requests. No guilt trips. I started doing things for myself. Things I hadn't done in years. I traveled. I joined a fitness club. I renovated my apartment. I even took a vacation in Maine. For the first time since my 20s. My money stayed in my account. And it felt incredible. Then, 3 months later, the call started again. This time it was Ethan. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. "Hey sis." I immediately noticed something strange. He sounded nervous. Ethan was never nervous. "What do you need?" A pause. "Nothing." Another pause. "Actually. There it is." I waited. "The cabin needs repairs." Of course it did. "The roof is damaged." I said nothing. "The estimate is around $30,000. $30,000. The same cabin Dad left entirely to Ethan. The same cabin I didn't inherit. The same cabin everyone celebrated him receiving. I almost admired the audacity. Almost. Then Ethan said something that made my jaw drop. "You should help because Dad would have wanted that." For a moment I genuinely thought I misheard him. Then I laughed. Not politely. Not kindly. Actually laughed. And for the first time in his life, Ethan sounded offended. "What is so funny?" I stopped laughing. Then I answered calmly. "If Dad wanted me to own part of the cabin." I paused. "He would have left me part of the cabin." Silence. Absolute silence. Then I hung up. Again. Over the next 6 months, things became interesting. Very interesting. Because without my money, reality started catching up to Ethan. Property taxes. Maintenance. Insurance. Utilities. Repairs. Suddenly, being the favorite son wasn't enough. And deep down, I had a feeling the real problems were only beginning. For most of his life, Ethan believed being the favorite came with benefits. And he was right. It did. Until the bills arrived. Then the benefits disappeared. About 8 months after Dad's death, I received a call from my cousin Megan. Unlike most relatives, Megan never took sides. She simply observed. Which made her information dangerous. "Claire," she said. "Have you heard about Ethan?" I hadn't. And honestly, I wasn't trying to. "What happened?" Megan laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind people make when they can't believe what they're witnessing. "He sold Dad's classic Mustang." I nearly dropped my coffee. Dad loved that car. Loved it. For years he refused every offer. People had offered ridiculous amounts of money. He always said no. And now Ethan sold it. Why? Money. Of course. The taxes on the cabin were overdue. The insurance payments were overdue. Several credit cards were maxed out. And according to Megan, Ethan had secretly borrowed against multiple assets Dad left him. My stomach tightened. Because I knew exactly what was happening. The inheritance looked impressive from the outside. But Ethan had no idea how to manage it. Dad spent decades building wealth. Ethan spent months destroying it. The difference was discipline. Something nobody ever forced Ethan to learn. A few weeks later another surprise arrived. A certified letter. Not from Ethan. Not from Mom. From a bank. At first I thought it was a mistake. Then I opened it. My jaw dropped. Apparently Ethan had listed me as an emergency contact on several financial documents years earlier. The bank was notifying me because multiple loans were seriously delinquent. I couldn't believe it. Even after everything, I was still somehow connected to his mess. That evening I called an attorney. Immediately. By the end of the week, every connection to Ethan's finances had been legally removed. For the first time in years, His problems belonged entirely to him. And that's when things got ugly. 3 months later, the lake cabin went up for sale. The same cabin Ethan fought to inherit. The same cabin worth excluding me for. The same cabin everyone acted like was some great prize. Gone. Sold. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was my mother's reaction. Because for the first time, she wasn't defending him anymore. She was angry. Really angry. One Sunday afternoon she called unexpectedly. "Claire." Her voice sounded exhausted. "What happened?" A long pause followed. Then she quietly said, "I think we made a mistake." I nearly stopped breathing. In 40 years. I had never heard my mother admit that. Not once. What kind of mistake? Silence. Then came words I never expected to hear. "We spent years rewarding the wrong child." I closed my eyes. Not because I felt victorious. Because I felt sad. Very sad. Mom continued. "We thought helping Ethan was love." Her voice broke. "But all we did was make him dependent." For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she whispered something that stayed with me forever. "And we punished you for being responsible." Tears filled my eyes. Because deep down, that was exactly what happened. The more reliable I became, the less appreciation I received. The more irresponsible Ethan became, the more attention he received. It had been backwards all along. And finally, someone else saw it too. But what neither of us knew was that the biggest secret Dad left behind hadn't been discovered yet. And 6 weeks later, a hidden document would completely change everything we thought we knew about his will. 6 weeks after my conversation with Mom, I received a call from Dad's old attorney. At first I assumed it was a mistake. Dad had been gone for almost 2 years. The will had already been read. The estate had already been distributed. What could possibly be left? Apparently, a lot. The attorney sounded nervous. Very nervous. "Claire, there's a document I think you should see." My stomach tightened. "What kind of document?" A pause. "One your father never intended anyone to find." I immediately drove to his office. The attorney placed an old manila folder on the desk. The folder looked worn. Almost forgotten. "What is this?" He took off his glasses. "It was discovered during the sale of your father's storage unit." Storage unit? I didn't even know Dad had one. Inside the folder were old financial records. Letters. Investment statements. Property documents. Then I found something that made my hands freeze. A second will. Not a copy. Not a draft. An entirely different will. Signed. Witnessed. Legally valid. My heart started racing. I quickly scanned the pages. And suddenly nothing made sense. According to this version, everything was supposed to be divided equally. 50% to Ethan. 50% to me. The house. The cabin. The investments. Everything. I looked up. "What is this?" The attorney sighed. "It's the version your father signed 3 years before he died." My pulse pounded. "But that's not the version we read." "No." "Then where did that version come from?" The attorney hesitated. Then he answered. "That's what concerns me." For several seconds I couldn't speak. Because only a handful of people had access to Dad's legal paperwork. Dad. The attorney. My mother. And Ethan. Suddenly a terrible possibility entered my mind. A possibility I didn't want to believe. Someone may have changed everything. The attorney leaned forward. "I'm not making accusations. But the timeline raises questions. Questions. That was an understatement. I drove home in complete silence. For 2 years I believed Dad intentionally cut me out. For 2 years I believed he chose Ethan. For 2 years I carried that pain. Now I wasn't sure what was true anymore. That evening I called Mom. The moment I mentioned the second will, she stopped breathing. Literally. Several seconds passed before she finally spoke. What did you say? I repeated it. Silence. Then Mom whispered. Oh my God. I knew immediately. She had never seen it before. And suddenly, neither of us knew what Ethan had been hiding. The next morning, Mom drove to my apartment. She hadn't done that in years. Not once. Not even after Dad died. Yet there she was. Standing at my door before sunrise. Looking terrified. The moment she walked inside, I handed her a copy of the second will. She read it once. Then again. Then a third time. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking. This is your father's signature. I nodded. She immediately recognized it. There was no doubt. The document was real. And if it was real, someone had benefited enormously from making it disappear. Neither of us wanted to say Ethan's name. But both of us were thinking it. That afternoon, Mom did something that shocked me. She called Ethan. And demanded answers. Not requested. Demanded. For the first time in his life, Mom wasn't protecting him. She told him to come to the house immediately. 2 hours later we were all sitting around the dining room table. The same table where countless family arguments had happened over the years. Only this time felt different. Mom placed the second will directly in front of Ethan. His face immediately changed. Not confusion. Not surprise. Fear. Real fear. The room went silent. Where did you get this? Ethan asked. That was the wrong question. The very wrong question. Because innocent people usually ask, what is this? Ethan already knew exactly what it was. Mom noticed too. And suddenly her expression hardened. Answer the question. For several seconds Ethan said nothing. Then he stood up. I don't know anything about that. Lie. Everyone knew it. Including him. Mom's voice cracked. Ethan. Years of disappointment filled that single word. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Did you know about this will? Silence. A long silence. The kind that tells you everything. Finally Ethan sat back down. And lowered his head. I already knew the answer before he spoke. Then he whispered. Yes. The room froze. Mom looked like she'd been punched. I couldn't breathe. Because suddenly 20 years of family history started rearranging itself in my mind. All the favoritism. All the excuses. All the protection. All the sacrifices. And somehow, it still wasn't enough for Ethan. He needed more. Much more. Tears filled Mom's eyes. Tell me the truth. Ethan stared at the floor. Then he finally did something I'd never seen before. He told the truth. Years earlier, while helping Dad organize paperwork, he discovered both wills. The equal version. And the newer version. But Dad had never finalized his decision. He kept changing his mind. According to Ethan, Dad felt guilty. Guilty because I had carried the family financially for years. Guilty because he knew I deserved more. And guilty because he knew favoritism had damaged our family. Then Dad got sick. The paperwork remained unfinished. And Ethan saw an opportunity. A terrible opportunity. He quietly removed documents. Moved paperwork. Ignored information. Never technically forging anything. Never technically changing anything. But making sure only one version reached the attorney. The version that benefited him. The room became completely silent. Mom started crying. Not quietly. Not softly. The kind of crying that comes from realizing you've spent years defending the wrong person. Then she stood up. And walked out of the room. Without saying a word. For the first time in his life. Ethan looked completely alone. Then he turned toward me. I never thought it would go this far. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. Neither did I. That night everything changed. Not legally. The estate couldn't easily be reversed. But emotionally. The illusion was finally gone. No more excuses. No more pretending. No more protecting Ethan from consequences. For the first time, everyone saw the truth. And strangely, that truth hurt Ethan more than losing any amount of money ever could. Because the one thing he'd always depended on, his family's blind loyalty, had finally disappeared. And 3 months later, something happened that nobody expected. Something that would completely change. 3 months after Ethan confessed, I received another unexpected phone call. This time it wasn't from Mom. Or Ethan. Or an attorney. It was from my father's closest friend. A man named Robert Hayes. Robert had known Dad for over 40 years. Practically family. We met for coffee the following Saturday. The moment I sat down, he slid a small envelope across the table. Your father wanted you to have this. My heart immediately started racing. What is it? Robert smiled sadly. He gave it to me 6 months before he died. I stared at the envelope. Why didn't I get it sooner? Robert sighed. Because he told me only to give it to you if the family ever fell apart. My stomach tightened. Then I slowly opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dad's handwriting. The moment I saw it, tears filled my eyes. Because I hadn't seen his handwriting since the funeral. I started reading. Claire. If you're reading this, I probably waited too long to fix my mistakes. I stopped breathing. I spent years believing your strength meant you needed less love. Tears rolled down my face. That was the biggest mistake of my life. The coffee shop disappeared around me. All I could see were those words. You carried burdens that never should have been yours. You paid bills that weren't your responsibility. You solved problems you didn't create. And instead of thanking you, I often took you for granted. I wiped my eyes. People around me continued drinking coffee. Talking. Laughing. Completely unaware that my world had just changed. Then I reached the final paragraph. If Ethan receives more than you, then I failed. I froze. Read it again. Then again. If Ethan receives more than you, then I failed. The sentence shattered 20 years of assumptions. For years I believed Dad intentionally chose Ethan. For years I believed I wasn't enough. For years I believed I mattered less. But according to this letter, Dad knew. He knew he had made mistakes. And he wanted to correct them. He just ran out of time. I cried all the way home. Not because of the inheritance. Not because of the money. Because for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Really seen. A week later Mom invited me to dinner. Just me. No Ethan. No relatives. No drama. Just us. When I arrived, she looked nervous. Then she handed me a folder. What is this? Mom smiled. Open it. Inside were property documents. Bank statements. Investment accounts. Then I saw my name. Everywhere. I looked up in confusion. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Your father and I spent years helping Ethan. She paused. Now it's time we do something for you. Over the previous months, Mom had sold several remaining family assets. Not because she needed to. Because she wanted things to be fair. For the first time in family history. Fair. The assets weren't equal to everything Ethan had already received. But they were significant. Very significant. I stared at the paperwork. Then at Mom. Why? She laughed through tears. Because we're finally telling the truth. And for once. That answer was enough. The biggest surprise came later. 6 months later. Thanksgiving. The first holiday in years where nobody argued. Nobody competed. Nobody manipulated anyone. Halfway through dinner, Ethan stood up. Everyone looked at him. Including me. He cleared his throat. Then said something I never expected to hear. I owe Claire an apology. The room became silent. Ethan looked directly at me. For years I let everyone believe I deserved things I didn't earn. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. He continued. I thought being the favorite meant I was better. His voice cracked. It didn't. Then he looked down. It just meant I was protected from consequences. For the first time in decades. The truth sat openly at the table. No excuses. No lies. No pretending. Just truth. And somehow, that truth healed more than any inheritance ever could. Later that night I stood outside alone. Looking at the stars. Thinking about everything that had happened. Dad. Mom. Ethan. The will. The betrayal. The years of sacrifice. And suddenly I realized something. My revenge had never been about making Ethan lose. It was about finally stopping myself from losing. The moment I stopped rescuing everyone, my own life finally began. A year later I started my own financial consulting firm. A successful one. 2 years later I bought a lake house of my own. Not inherited. Not gifted. Not taken from anyone. Earned. And every time I sat on that porch watching the sunset, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't exposing the people who hurt you. It's building a life so good, so peaceful, and so fulfilling, that their approval no longer matters.